Hi, Jeff Simon here from SocialFlight.com, and with our T51 Mustang build, we have another stage of building to talk to you about. Now, one of the most really interesting parts of this entire aircraft design is the cockpit, and this forward cockpit section is where an awful lot of the structural integrity happens. And a lot of the systems happen, because this is where we're going to start with our first control of the aircraft, and that's the rudder pedal setup. Now, in the cockpit, they have a very interesting design. We talked before about this Station 3 bulkhead, which is an extremely strong structure, and it has this reinforced piece here in the center, which is our main rudder control support. And now what we're going to do is we're going to put the sides of the cockpit, of the forward cockpit in, and then also the structure that's going to make these rudder pedals happen. So the way that this works is it starts with this center console piece. This center console piece will go into the aircraft, get put into position here in the center, and that leaves these two strong vertical members that we can then use as part of the center support for the rudder pedals. Now, the rudder pedals in the T51 Mustang are adjustable, so it's a tube that that the actual pedals and that assembly can slide on. But the next thing that needs to happen are the sides. Now, just like the other parts when we talk about skins or floors of the aircraft or bulkheads, we start with sheet metal that is pretty flexible. And when that gets put into place, this piece in particular is actually going to get put into place inside here, on the inside of these doublers, hat sections, and U sections, and that's going to make it very rigid. Now, on top of that, we have this other piece, which is going to go along in the floor section of it. That piece goes down to form the structural part along the bottom, and then, if you can visualize it, we have this last piece that will go like this, and this section here will form a guide that the side of this will slide on. So now, this is pretty hard to understand without seeing the rudder pedals themselves. So let's take a look at the rudder pedals. One of the nice things is that the entire rudder pedal assembly comes complete from Titan Aircraft. So we don't have to go and do anything that has to do with the installation of this. This piece is the entire assembly. And the rudder pedals independently move back and forth. They'll have the hydraulic master cylinders put on them so that the brakes will work from the front seat as well. And what you can see here is this tube that has these different holes in it with this latching assembly that allows for it to slide. And that is how you wind up with adjusting the rudder pedals fore and aft. So we have this center, and that's what we talked about in terms of what will get mounted between the center pedestal and the station number 3 bulkhead. And then on the sides you have these phenolic blocks. You can see these blocks right here, and these are the blocks that, I'll grab one of these, these are the blocks that actually will slide along these rails. And that's how that happens. We have 3 points of support. We have the left, the right side rails, and then we also have the center tube. So all of this is what we're going to be assembling now. We're going to start with those side pieces, we'll get them in place, and then we'll be moving along to being able to put the supports directly in place here. So follow us along. Now, as different parts of the aircraft get assembled, inevitably we have sections where different things get layered upon one another. And that makes it really hard to plan in advance when you're drilling holes. So we did our best when we were doing the forward cockpit floor at putting in the rivet pattern that made sense for the doubler that's underneath it to provide a lot of good structural integrity. But once we go and we put in this little kick panel here, we see that we're partially overlapping a hole here. And so in this particular case, it's probably about 25% of the hole that's being overlapped by this little flange. And we probably don't even need that section where we're going to be riveting through to put this kick panel into place. So I've marked it with a Sharpie, and all we're going to do is provide, we're going to nibble it back a little bit, provide a little clearance so that when we put that rivet in, we don't actually do a partial overlapping that would reduce the structural strength of that particular rivet location. So just a little example of some of the things that you run into as you're doing the build, and it's kind of hard to foresee all of them as we layer all these different things on top of one another. All right, so the basic process to attach two sheets of aluminum is fairly straightforward. You drill a hole between both parts and you attach it using a cleco, which we talked about before, which is a temporary fastener. That said, there's a lot of situations that are a little more complex than that, and this is one of them. When this piece lays down and we're looking vertically, we really can't get a drill in at an angle that would make sense in order to kind of drill those matched holes. So there's a number of steps we need to go through, and the first thing we need to do is actually look at laying out the holes, and then we got to figure out how is it that we're going to be able to drill both through this as well as through the floor in the same location if we're not going through the top, and if we do need to know how we're going to make those drill holes line up. Now, the first thing that we need to do is actually figure out where we need to put those holes, and we're going to do that using this rivet fan tool. So, or what's also known as a fan spacing tool, and that is a simple accordion device that makes it possible to always have equal spacing between the marks that you're putting on the sheet that you're going to drill. And so in this case, the default rivet spacing for the T51 Mustang, unless it's specified otherwise, is 1.5 inches. So we basically measured this out to we're about 1.5 inches apart for each hole, and then we lay it out on the piece and mark those holes. But we generally have to do two things because this doesn't always line up perfectly. We start by going and lining the spacing for where each of those holes is going to be, and then we also go and draw a straight line that goes directly down the center of the flange, and then we can make those final marks knowing where each of those rivets is going to go. Now, lastly, we've all had the experience when we're going to drill a hole that the drill bit kind of wanders a little bit and doesn't go exactly where we want it to be. And so once we have the marks done, we actually take this center punch tool, and they make these in a variety of forms. I like this little one, which is like a mini center punch, and we push this down until it clicks. That actually has a spring-loaded device inside that will put a small dent in the aluminum that centers the bit so that when we go and we start to drill that hole, the drill bit stays centered as we push it through. Okay, so that's the real basic part of riveting. But in this case, we have to do things a little bit differently because when we lay this in and we don't have enough clearance in order to get that drill in, we actually have to figure out a different way of approaching it. So the way that I've decided to approach this part is I'm going to take that part that we do here and I'm going to actually lay it out on the bottom. So I've laid out my drill spacing on the bottom. I go and I put the center line in place, and then I punch it going this way. So I've done that using a piece of wood where I can go and lay this across, have a straight edge, and be able to work on this. Then I'm going to drill all the holes in this piece first, put the piece in place in the aircraft, and then go and draw where the matching hole locations are going to be in the floor. Then I can remove this, I have the hole locations in the floor, and then I can go and drill those when I have lots of clearance for my drill. They should all line up fine, and then we can put everything in place temporarily and verify it with clecos. And the last step about why all of this ends up working out well is because we're doing all of this using what's called a number 40 bit. The number 40 drill bit is smaller than what our final size will be for each of the holes. That's actually a number 30 drill bit, which works for a 1/8 inch pop rivet. So the reason for that is we get all these pilot holes drilled. We do our best to get them lined up as perfectly as possible, but then at the final step when things are going together, we take the full size drill bit, we go in, that cleans up any inaccuracies that are there as the hole gets enlarged. We can do that from the bottom where we have plenty of clearance, and then we're all set to clean up the holes and do our final riveting. And so that is a quick primer on attaching pieces, and also some of the challenges that we face as we go through this and find some tight locations and areas that we have to be creative in figuring out how to get our holes, clecos, and then finally our rivets. One of the great things about experimental amateur-built aircraft is that they are evolving all the time. And this Titan T51D Mustang has as well. It started out being powered by a Rotax engine and then got successive other engines like the Suzuki and the Honda automotive engines. Now we have this really cool, powerful GM LS3 V8 engine that's going to get installed here. However, there are some changes to the design of the fuselage that accommodate that. And some of them aren't just ahead of the firewall. In the case of our design here, we now have this double wall design for our station number 3 bulkhead, which is great. We've done that in place, but the side panels that we actually have for the aircraft were designed for a single wall construction. So we're going to have to make a little modification. We're going to have to cut off the flange here, which mounts forward, and then we're going to have to bend a new flange in place. So follow along and we'll modify this part and then get it installed in place. Well, you definitely don't have to have a tool like this 30-inch shear press brake and slip roll in order to build your own kit plane. But it does help to do some things like modifying parts. And the truth is, it's a lot of fun. And so it wasn't really that expensive for us to go and get this. It was right around $300. And for the entire 2 years of this build, we'll be able to shear pieces off very easily, bend pieces, make some custom parts that we have some ideas for that'll do things that you're going to see later in our cockpit especially. So we're going to take this right now and we're going to both shear off this flange that is in the wrong location that we just talked about in the front, and then we're actually going to go and bend a new flange onto it. It's going to take just a minute using this really cool tool. Now, as we talked about before, the design of the rudder pedals in the T51 Mustang is adjustable, and they slide along a mechanism on this tube which has holes drilled in it that allow them to lock into position at different positions along their travel. Now, just as we had with the front side panels though, because of that double-walled station number 3 bulkhead, we're going to have to cut back on this tube by ½ an inch and trim it back so that we can clean it up and then use these end caps. The end caps go into place positioned like this, and then it gets mounted to the wall back and forth, and then the rudder pedals can slide right along that. So let's get this tube cut and fit and see if we can get the rudder pedals mounted up. If you remember from before, one of the reasons that we love using step drills is that we can use them not just to enlarge a hole and drill a hole, but also as a deburring tool. And we're going to use it on the inside of the pipe for the rudder pedals as well, because it does a great job of just putting a little chamfer on and taking that rough edge off the side of it. Okay, so we reached another milestone in our Titan T51D Mustang build with the rudder pedals in place and the forward cockpit all ready to go. Next step, we're going to actually disassemble it, get everything painted and ready for its final assembly with rivets. Now, none of this would be possible if it wasn't for SocialFlight.com and our partners as well. So be sure to get the free SocialFlight app and visit SocialFlight.com. We have tons of prizes out there, tens of thousands of places to fly and things to do. It's all possible because of SocialFlight. So thanks for checking that out, and we will see you soon at the next step of our Titan T51D Mustang build.